The morning started like any other at Starlight Medical Center. Nurses hurried through the brightly lit hallways. Doctors consulted patients, and the hospital manager, Margaret Johnson, made her usual rounds, ensuring everything was running smoothly. Margaret was a strict but efficient leader, known for her sharp eye and unyielding standards. To her, the hospital wasn't just a place for healing. It was a symbol of excellence. Meanwhile, a man in casual clothes stepped through the hospital's main entrance. He wore jeans, a navy jacket, and a bright red MAGA hat. The man looked around with a curious expression, taking in the bustling activity. No one seemed to notice him at first, but a few staff members glanced at him twice, some whispering to one another. This man was Elon Musk, one of the world's most well-known entrepreneurs. What no one at the hospital knew, except for a select few, was that Elon had recently acquired Starlight Medical Center as part of a broader initiative to improve healthcare systems. But Elon wasn't there to make grand announcements or be the center of attention. He preferred to walk in quietly, observe, and understand how the hospital operated. Margaret happened to pass through the lobby when she first noticed Elon. Her sharp eyes immediately landed on the red MAGA hat perched on his head. It stood out against the professional atmosphere of the hospital. To Margaret, the hat seemed inappropriate, even offensive, in such a setting. "Who is that?" Margaret asked a security guard nearby. "I'm not sure, Mom," the guard replied. "He just walked in." Margaret's eyebrows furrowed. "Keep an eye on him. He doesn't look like he belongs here." The guard nodded and subtly moved closer to Elon, who was now strolling down a hallway, glancing at the signs and smiling politely at passing nurses. Elon's casual demeanor and curious nature were far from threatening, but Margaret's instincts told her otherwise. As Elon turned a corner, he paused to watch a nurse carefully explain medication instructions to an elderly patient. He smiled, impressed by the nurse's patience and kindness. He made a mental note to commend the staff for their dedication later. But before he could move on, Margaret approached him with her usual authoritative stride. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone firm. "Can I help you?" Elon turned to her, his expression friendly. "Oh, hi. I'm just looking around. It's a beautiful hospital." Margaret didn't return his smile. "This is a professional environment, and we expect our visitors to respect that. That hat, it's not appropriate here." Elon's eyebrows raised slightly. "The hat, it's just a hat," he said calmly, still smiling. Margaret crossed her arms. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to remove it or leave. We don't allow political statements in this facility." Elon tilted his head, clearly amused but not offended. "I'm not here to make a political statement. I'm here to see how things are running." Margaret's patience was thinning. "And why would that concern you?" she asked, her tone growing sharper. "Unless you're here for a medical reason, I suggest you leave before I have security escort you out." Elon hesitated for a moment, debating whether to reveal his identity. But he decided against it, for now. He wanted to see how far this would go. "All right," he said lightly, "but I'd like to speak to someone in charge before I go." Margaret gave a short laugh. "You're speaking to the manager of this hospital. And I'm telling you, if you don't comply, you'll be escorted out." Elon nodded thoughtfully, his smile fading just slightly. "All right, let's see how this plays out." Margaret turned to the security guard, giving him a subtle nod. The guard stepped closer, ready to act. Elon stood calmly, hands in his jacket pockets, waiting to see how far Margaret would push her authority. Unbeknownst to her, the man she was about to kick out was not just a visitor. He was the hospital's new owner. And Margaret was about to learn this in a way she'd never forget. Margaret stood with her arms crossed, her expression stern as the security guard moved closer to Elon Musk. She was determined to enforce her authority, convinced that this casually dressed man, with his red MAGA hat, was nothing more than a disruptive visitor. The hallway had grown quieter as hospital staff began to notice the exchange, some casting curious glances while pretending to go about their work. Elon, on the other hand, remained calm. His hands were casually tucked into his jacket pockets, and his expression held no trace of anger or frustration. If anything, he seemed intrigued by Margaret's persistence. He was used to dealing with strong personalities, and Margaret's commanding tone didn't faze him. "Sir," Margaret said again, her voice firm but not shouting, "I won't ask you again. Either remove the hat or leave the premises." Elon smiled faintly. "I understand you're trying to maintain order here, and I respect that, but I'm not here to cause trouble." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here? This is a hospital, not a public meeting place." Elon glanced around at the well-maintained hallways and busy staff. "I'm here to observe, to understand how things work. You could say I have a vested interest in this place." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "A vested interest? Are you a donor or something?" Elon chuckled softly. "Something like that." Margaret wasn't amused. To her, this man's vague answers and refusal to comply with her demands were signs of disrespect. She turned to the security guard. "Escort him out. Now." The guard hesitated for a moment, recognizing Elon and unsure how to proceed. "Oh, ma'am, are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," Margaret snapped. "We can't have random people walking around disturbing our operations." The guard reluctantly stepped closer to Elon. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elon held up his hands, signaling he wasn't resisting. "No need to get physical. I'll go, if you insist. But I'd still like to speak to someone about this hospital." Margaret rolled her eyes. "I told you already. I'm the manager here. You can speak to me, but I've made it clear you're not welcome unless you follow the rules." Elon tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "All right, let's see where this goes." As the security guard gently guided Elon toward the exit, a senior nurse, Ms. Reynolds, watched from a distance. She recognized Elon immediately and hurried to stop them. "Wait," she called out, her voice echoing in the quiet hallway. Margaret turned sharply, annoyed by the interruption. "Ms. Reynolds, what is it?" The nurse hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously between Margaret and Elon. "Do you know who this is?" she asked carefully. Margaret frowned. "A visitor who refuses to follow the rules. That's all I need to know." Ms. Reynolds took a deep breath. "This is Elon Musk." Margaret blinked, her frown deepening. "What are you talking about?" "Elon Musk doesn't walk into hospitals wearing a baseball cap." "He does when he's the new owner of the hospital," Ms. Reynolds said, her voice steady despite the tension. The realization hit Margaret like a cold wave. She stared at Elon, her earlier confidence now replaced with a mix of disbelief and panic. "You're Elon Musk?" she asked, her voice quieter. Elon gave her a small nod, his expression calm. "That's me. And yes, I am the new owner of this hospital." Margaret's face turned pale. The security guard quickly stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The hallway grew silent as the staff who had been watching exchanged stunned looks. I didn't know," Margaret stammered. "I thought you were just a visitor with no importance." Elon finished for her, his tone still polite but firm. "I could see how you'd think that. But maybe this is a good time to talk about how visitors and staff should be treated, regardless of who they are." Margaret struggled to find the right words. She opened her mouth to apologize, but Elon held up a hand. "We'll talk about this later. Right now, I'd like to continue observing the hospital, with or without the hat." Margaret nodded quickly, stepping aside. "Of course, Mr. Musk. Please, go ahead." Elon walked past her, giving a small nod to Ms. Reynolds in thanks. As he continued down the hallway, Margaret stood frozen, realizing she had just made one of the biggest mistakes of her career. As he walked further into the hospital, Elon couldn't help but take in the details. The hallways were clean, the staff were moving efficiently, and the patients looked well cared for. The hospital was clearly a place that prided itself on quality. He had bought it with the intention of improving it even further, and he was already formulating ideas about what could be done to take it to the next level. However, the encounter with Margaret had left him with some questions about the leadership here. Meanwhile, Margaret stood frozen in the hallway, her face still pale from the realization that she had just tried to kick out the new owner of the hospital. Her mind raced, replaying the conversation over and over. How could she have been so blind? She had seen the man walk in, judged him by his appearance, and assumed he was just another visitor. Worse yet, she had refused to listen when he explained himself. Now, she was left with the uncomfortable truth that her actions could cost her not only her job, but also her reputation. As Margaret stood there, trying to regain her composure, Ms. Reynolds approached her slowly. The nurse had witnessed the entire encounter and now stood beside Margaret, her face full of concern. "Margaret," Ms. Reynolds said quietly, "do you realize who you just—" Margaret cut her off. "Yes, I know. I've made a huge mistake." Her voice trembled slightly as the weight of the situation sank in. Ms. Reynolds sighed. "I understand. But you have to understand, too, that this isn't just about a hat. It's about how we treat people, regardless of what they wear or who they are. You just treated Elon Musk as if he were a nobody." Margaret winced at the truth in Ms. Reynolds' words. She had let her personal biases cloud her judgment. Instead of handling the situation with professionalism, she had acted based on assumptions. Now she had to figure out how to make things right. Elon continued his walk down the hallway, unfazed by what had just happened. He wasn't upset, but he was definitely curious about the kind of leadership that existed at the hospital. As he reached the end of the hall, he paused and turned to one of the nurses standing nearby. "How long has Margaret been in charge here?" he asked casually. The nurse, who had been watching the interaction closely, replied, "For about 5 years now. She's been a good manager in many ways, efficient and tough. But sometimes she's a bit too quick to judge." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "I see." The nurse lowered her voice. "She's worked hard, but she's not always easy to approach." Elon thought about this for a moment. He understood the importance of tough leadership, but he also believed in fairness and empathy. Perhaps this hospital needed both, a balance between strength and understanding. He knew that changes had to be made, but he wasn't here to tear the place apart. He was here to make it better. After a few minutes, Elon turned around and made his way back toward the front of the hospital. He wanted to see if anyone would stop him this time. As he walked, he noticed the staff were still giving him curious looks, but no one confronted him again. It seemed they were all waiting to see what would happen next. When he reached the main lobby, he found Margaret standing there, looking a little lost. She had clearly been thinking about how to handle the situation, and when she saw Elon approaching, she took a deep breath and walked toward him. "Elon," she began, her voice more measured than before, "I owe you an apology. I acted in a way that wasn't professional, and I am truly sorry. I misjudged you, and I deeply regret how I handled everything." Elon looked at her, his expression neutral. "I appreciate your apology, Margaret, but I want to make one thing clear. It's not just about the hat. It's about how you treat everyone, no matter who they are. If you treat people with respect, you build a better environment for everyone." Margaret nodded, her eyes meeting his. "You're right. I should have known better. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Elon smiled, the tension easing. "Good. Let's make this hospital a place where people feel respected and valued. Not just the patients, but the staff too." Margaret felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. The hospital had the potential to become something truly remarkable, but it would take leadership that understood the importance of empathy, respect, and fairness. As Elon walked away, Margaret stood still for a moment, watching him disappear down the hallway. She was determined to prove that she could lead with a new perspective, one that valued every person who walked through the doors of Starlight Medical Center. After the brief but tense encounter, Things settled down at Starlight Medical Center. The staff continued their work, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. Whispers about the incident with the new owner, Elon Musk, filled the hallways. Most were curious about the man who had caused such a stir, especially given the unexpected way Margaret had treated him. Meanwhile, Margaret spent much of her afternoon in her office, reflecting on what had happened. She had always prided herself on being in control, maintaining the highest standards, and ensuring the hospital ran smoothly. But today, she had allowed her personal feelings to cloud her judgment. She had overreacted and dismissed someone who, it turned out, had far more influence than she could have imagined. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from James, one of the senior doctors. "I heard about what happened with Elon. Are you okay?" Margaret stared at the message for a moment, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to admit how embarrassed she felt, but she knew James was only looking out for her. With a sigh, she typed back, "I'll be fine. Just have to make things right." Elon Musk spent the rest of the day touring the hospital, observing the various departments and talking to staff members. He was impressed by the quality of care, the dedication of the nurses, and the professionalism of the doctors. However, he couldn't help but wonder about the management. He had already seen how one poor interaction could shake up the atmosphere of the place. If the hospital was to reach its full potential, the leadership would need to improve. At the end of the day, Elon met with a group of department heads in the hospital's conference room. He kept the meeting short, making it clear that he was there to listen. He asked each leader about their department's strengths and challenges, but he also asked them about the overall culture within the hospital. When it was Margaret's turn to speak, she stood up, her posture firm but her voice quieter than usual. "As the hospital manager, I am responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations. I ensure that everything runs smoothly. However, I know today was a mistake in how I handled things. I misjudged the situation with Mr. Musk." The room fell silent. The department heads exchanged glances, clearly surprised. Margaret continued, "I've realized that I need to make changes in how I lead, especially when it comes to treating everyone with the respect they deserve. It's not just about the policies we enforce. It's about the kind of environment we create." Elon nodded, his expression calm. "I appreciate you taking responsibility, Margaret. It's not easy to admit mistakes, but it's a crucial step in building trust." Margaret looked around the room at her colleagues, each of them waiting for her next move. She felt a sense of relief knowing she had the support of the leadership team. Still, she understood that she needed to earn their respect again. Later that evening, after a long day of meetings and tours, Margaret found herself walking down the same hallway where everything had started. The hospital was quieter now, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by the soft sounds of footsteps and distant voices. She walked past the nurses' station, where a few staff members were still finishing their paperwork. As she approached, one of the nurses looked up, offering a small smile. Margaret smiled back, though she could feel the unease lingering in the air. Before she could move on, the nurse spoke up. "Margaret," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say, we know it wasn't easy today. But I think we all appreciate your honesty. It's not easy admitting when we're wrong." Margaret nodded, feeling a sense of warmth from the nurse's words. "Thank you. I'll do better. We all will." The next day, Margaret decided to make the first step in rebuilding trust within the hospital. She called for a staff meeting and invited everyone to attend. It wasn't just a formality. It was an opportunity to address the entire hospital and set the tone for the future. When the meeting began, Margaret stood in front of the room, taking a deep breath. "I want to apologize to each and every one of you," she began. "Yesterday, I made a mistake. As a leader, I failed to treat someone with the respect they deserve, but I'm committed to making sure that this never happens again. We are a team, and we are only as strong as the trust we have in each other." She continued, "Going forward, I'm asking each of you to hold me accountable. If you feel that I'm not doing enough to support you, speak up. I promise to listen, and I promise to do better." The room was quiet for a moment, but then a few people began nodding. Margaret could see that her words were making an impact. The weeks that followed were filled with change and reflection at Starlight Medical Center. Margaret had taken Elon Musk's words to heart, and she was determined to prove that she could lead with humility and understanding. The hospital staff, who had witnessed her mistake, began to see her efforts to make things right. It wasn't easy, but Margaret was committed to showing everyone that she could lead the hospital in a new direction. Each day, Margaret made a conscious effort to engage with her staff, listening to their concerns and addressing their needs. She held regular meetings with the department heads to ensure that the hospital's operations were running smoothly and that the culture was shifting toward one of respect and cooperation. One afternoon, Margaret stood in front of the hospital's main entrance, watching the flow of patients and visitors as they came and went. The building, with its modern design and welcoming atmosphere, had always been a symbol of health and care. But now, Margaret saw it as something more, something that represented her personal mission to bring about positive change. She remembered how, not long ago, she had been focused solely on the hospital's success, on its operations and bottom line. But now, her focus had shifted. She wanted the hospital to be a place where everyone felt valued, where respect was the foundation of every interaction. This vision wasn't just about improving the hospital, it was about improving the community they served. Elon, for his part, had kept a close eye on the hospital's progress. He was pleased with the changes he saw, not only in the hospital's operations, but in the way the staff interacted with one another and with patients. He had made it clear to Margaret that he expected transparency and a commitment to continuous improvement. One day, Elon visited the hospital again, this time to meet with the leadership team and discuss the next steps. Margaret was nervous but prepared. She knew this meeting would be important in solidifying her position as the hospital's manager. In the meeting room, Elon sat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the faces of the department heads and staff. Margaret stood at the front, prepared to present the progress the hospital had made over the past few weeks. "I'm proud of the work we've done so far," Margaret began, her voice steady. "We've made significant strides in improving communication and respect across all departments. We've launched a new training program focused on empathy and patient care. And we've started monthly feedback sessions with staff to ensure their voices are heard." Elon nodded approvingly. "I've been hearing good things about the changes, Margaret. The staff seems more engaged, and patients are noticing a difference. I appreciate the effort you've put in." Margaret smiled, relieved. "Thank you. It's been a team effort. But there's still a lot of work to be done." Elon's expression became more serious. "I agree. The next step is to make sure this culture shift is felt in every corner of the hospital. We need to ensure that every patient, no matter their background, feels welcomed and respected. This hospital has a reputation for quality care, but we can always do more to improve." As the meeting continued, Margaret felt a sense of pride. She had come a long way since that awkward first encounter with Elon. She had learned that leadership wasn't about controlling every situation. It was about guiding people with empathy and understanding. After the meeting, Elon stayed for a tour of the hospital. He spoke with patients, doctors, and nurses, asking them about their experiences and whether they felt the changes were making a difference. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with many staff members mentioning how much the hospital's atmosphere had improved since Margaret had taken a more open and approachable leadership style. As the day came to a close, Margaret walked through the hospital, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The halls that once felt cold and impersonal now felt warm and welcoming. She could see the difference in the staff's interactions with one another, and she could hear the laughter and conversation in the break rooms. She knew that her journey wasn't over, but she was more confident than ever in her ability to lead. The mistakes of the past were not forgotten, but they had become lessons, guiding her toward a more balanced and compassionate approach to management. That evening, as Margaret sat at her desk, reviewing the reports from the day, she received a message from Elon. It was simple, but the words meant a lot to her. "Keep up the great work. You're making a difference." Margaret smiled. She knew that, with time, she would continue to grow as a leader. And with the support of Elon and her team, Starlight Medical Center would continue to be a place of healing, respect, and excellence for everyone who walked through its doors. The days at Starlight Medical Center were moving forward, and Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. The hospital was changing for the better, and every day seemed like a new opportunity to strengthen the foundation of trust, respect, and professionalism. It hadn't been easy. Change rarely was, but Margaret could see the progress. She had learned valuable lessons from her past mistakes, and now she was focused on making the hospital a place that truly felt like a community. One afternoon, Margaret sat in her office reviewing feedback from patients and staff. The new feedback system was proving to be a helpful tool in understanding how the hospital was doing and where improvements were needed. While there were still areas to work on, the overall response was positive. Staff members had begun to feel more valued and heard, and patients reported feeling more comfortable and respected. But Margaret knew this was only the beginning. To create lasting change, she needed to ensure that every employee, from the janitors to the doctors, was truly on board with the new direction the hospital was heading in. It wasn't just about policies and training. It was about a shift in mindset. Margaret knew that if they were going to build lasting relationships with the community, they needed to start within the hospital itself. One day, Elon visited again to see how things were progressing. This time, he was accompanied by a few members of his team, who were involved in overseeing some of his other investments. As he walked through the hospital, Elon was greeted by many of the staff, who now seemed more confident and open. The atmosphere had certainly changed since his last visit. Elon made his way to Margaret's office, where she was working on a report. "How's it going?" he asked, standing in the doorway with a smile. Margaret looked up, pleased to see him. "It's going well. I've been reading through the feedback, and it looks like we're on the right track. Staff morale is up, and patients are commenting on the positive changes." "That's great to hear," Elon replied. "But it's important to keep pushing for progress. I think there's still a lot we can do to make this place even better." Margaret nodded. "Absolutely. I'm focused on continuing to foster communication between departments and ensuring everyone feels included in this process. It's not just about the management team. It's about the whole hospital working together as one." Elon smiled. "That's the right mindset. You're doing a great job, Margaret." Later that day, Margaret held a meeting with the leadership team to discuss the next steps. She wanted to ensure that everyone was still on the same page and that the changes they were making were not just temporary fixes but sustainable improvements. During the meeting, Dr. Patel, the chief surgeon, raised his hand. "Margaret, I think we need to focus more on training our staff to handle difficult situations. We all know that in healthcare, things can get tense, especially in emergency situations. Having the right tools to de-escalate those moments can make a huge difference in patient care." Margaret appreciated Dr. Patel's input. "I agree, Dr. Patel. I think we need to focus on empathy training, especially for staff who are in high-stress environments. We need to teach everyone how to communicate calmly and effectively, no matter the situation." The meeting continued with the team brainstorming ideas on how to further improve the hospital's culture. It was clear that everyone was invested in the change, and Margaret felt proud of how far they had come. She had always known that good leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about listening, learning, and growing with the team. As the weeks passed, Margaret and her team worked on implementing the new training programs. The staff attended workshops that focused on communication skills, patient empathy, and conflict resolution. Margaret made it a point to attend many of the sessions herself, showing that she was fully committed to the process. During one of the training sessions, Margaret stood in front of a room full of nurses and staff members, discussing how to handle challenging situations with patients. "It's easy to assume we know what's best for someone," she said, "but we need to listen first. When patients feel heard and understood, they're more likely to trust us. which makes all the difference in their care. The nurses nodded in agreement, and Margaret could see the positive shift in their attitudes. There was a renewed sense of purpose in the room, and she felt hopeful for what was to come. Starlight Medical Center had come a long way since the difficult day when Margaret had mistakenly tried to kick out Elon Musk. The hospital had been through a transformation, and Margaret had played a huge role in leading that change. The staff was more engaged, the patients felt more cared for, and the community was starting to notice. One afternoon, Elon came by for another visit. He had been pleased with the progress and wanted to see how the hospital was continuing to improve. Margaret greeted him in the lobby, feeling more confident than before. "Elon, it's great to see you again," Margaret said with a smile. "Elon," said a nurse who had just passed by, waving to him. "Welcome back." Elon nodded, smiling back at the nurse. It was clear that the atmosphere at the hospital was much more positive now. Staff were more comfortable interacting with him, and patients seemed happier. It felt like a place where everyone was genuinely working together to make a difference. During their meeting later that afternoon, Margaret and Elon discussed the progress that had been made. Margaret shared the results of the recent surveys and feedback from both patients and staff, which showed significant improvements in the hospital's operations. More people were noticing the changes, and the hospital's reputation was growing stronger. "I'm happy to hear the positive feedback," Elon said, nodding. "But remember, change takes time. We need to keep pushing forward." "I know," Margaret replied, feeling determined. "But I'm proud of what we've achieved. We've created a culture of respect and communication. Our staff is motivated, and the patients feel it." Elon smiled. "You've done a great job, Margaret. I knew from the start that you had the potential to lead this place in the right direction. Keep it up." Margaret left the meeting feeling more confident than ever. She had faced challenges, learned from her mistakes, and ultimately improved not just her leadership, but also the hospital itself. There was still work to be done, but Margaret felt a sense of accomplishment. She had been given the opportunity to change, and now she was making the most of it. The next few weeks were filled with more improvements. The hospital hosted a series of community events to engage with local residents, showing them the progress and the commitment to providing the best care possible. These events helped bridge the gap between the hospital and the community, creating stronger bonds. As Margaret walked through the halls one day, she overheard a conversation between two nurses. "I've never seen this place so full of energy," one of them said. "It's like everyone is excited to come to work." Margaret smiled to herself. The staff was now working together, inspired to do their best for the patients. The changes were becoming part of the hospital's everyday routine. At the end of the day, Margaret stood by the window in her office, looking out over the city. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had learned so much about leadership, empathy, and the importance of creating a positive, inclusive environment. This wasn't just about running a hospital. It was about building a place where people were treated with respect and dignity, a place where every patient and every staff member felt valued. And as Margaret looked out at the horizon, she knew that the journey was far from over. The future of Starlight Medical Center was bright, and she was ready to lead it into the next chapter. Margaret's heart swelled with pride. The road had been challenging, but with every step, she was building something better. The best was yet to come.